Well, to kick off our second half of our afternoon discussions, we're going to have a panel about bringing the food chain to the table. And in order to do that, emceeing the panel, moderating the panel today is Jim Dudlicek. As editorial director of Progressive Grocer, he oversees daily operations of the magazine and its print and digital brand initiatives, spearheads signature features, produces PG's monthly Trend Alert newsletter on center store issues, helps organize brand events, and moderates webcasts, and writes and comments about a wide range of grocery issues. So to moderate our panel this afternoon, let's welcome Jim Dudlicek to the stage.
Very much, everybody. Grocery retailers, food service operators, distributors, they've all made sweeping promises and set aggressive deadlines for changing the way they procure products in accordance with animal welfare desires of consumers. And we're going to talk about what kinds of challenges they're going through this afternoon. We have three very distinguished members of those communities today. So I'd like to bring them up here for our discussion this afternoon. First, we have David Guilhaus. He is Senior Manager of Food Safety for Publix supermarkets. David has almost 20 years of food experience in retail, manufacturing, distribution, and food service after having joined Publix in 2001. In his current role as Senior Food Safety Manager, he is responsible for developing corporate food safety strategies and serving as the subject matter expert for animal well-being, food safety, and quality matters. Next, we have Judy Pinellas, Senior Director of Sustainability and Supply Management for Sodexo. Judy works to incorporate internal and client goals for sustainability and corporate responsibility into sourcing strategies, including local sourcing, sustainable products, responsible supply chain practices, and sustainability innovation. Before coming to the food industry, Judy worked in medical device manufacturing and held various roles in sustainability and supply chain management. And last but not least, we have Mark Smith. He is the Chief Procurement Officer for Centralized Supply Chain Services. Mark is responsible for the sourcing and contracting of all food and certain non-ingredient supplies, as well as ensuring that programs developed and implemented by both the Applebee's and IHOP brands are properly supported. Mark previously held various purchasing and analyst positions with Carl's Jr., Bell Food Services, Taco Bell, and Proficient Food Company Incorporated. So please welcome our panelists this afternoon. Thanks very much, everybody. To get us started, I'd like you each to tell us a little bit about how your company makes decisions regarding sourcing of animal proteins and what role you each play in that process.
I guess I can start. Is it on?
Okay, there it is. So what I do within Publix, I actually work with our supply chain industrial operations team, so our manufacturing distribution, working with our facilities that produce animal and meat products, dairy, beef, pork, poultry, those sorts of things. So my involvement is more on the supply chain and the, I guess, the use side of those materials. And we work with selecting the right suppliers, working with them, making sure they've got the right certifications, following the right standards that we've selected, and then supporting those either with audits or with review of materials, documents, etc. So, in a nutshell.
So, hello? Test. There we go. So I come with the perspective of a really large food service organization. So we service over 11,000 client sites in North America and have over 160,000 employees. We operate in multi-sector environments, so we have to think about everything that we're purchasing is purchasing for our clients and for their customers. So whether that's university students, K-12 students, corporate environments, healthcare, seniors, remote sites, we're on Gulf Coast oil rigs, what else have we got? We've got museums, aquariums, convention centers. So you can imagine all the different types of clients and customers with their own kind of goals. So Sodexo looks at not only our own environmental and social responsibility, as we look at the corporate responsibility of what we buy, we have our own values there. And they focus on our impact on individuals, communities, and the environment. And we think about it in our roles as an employer, a service provider, and a corporate citizen. So if you think about those types of things, we'll set global goals in many cases about what we as a company believe, whether it's in animal welfare, safety, environmental responsibility, carbon footprint, how workers are treated. So we run the gamut of everything that falls under corporate responsibility in how we say we'll operate. But then on top of that, our clients have their own ideas, right, and their own priorities. And so as we source, we have to take all of that into consideration and make sure that at least our baseline of corporate responsibility is covered in what we source and the commitments that we make, either globally or regionally, depending on the market. And then also that we have the choice available in our supply chain to fit the whole variety of clients and consumers that we're dealing with on a daily basis.
Good afternoon. The organization I work for is we're actually a cooperative. We are owned by the operators of the Applebee's and IHOP restaurant chains. So we service about 3,500 restaurants. Our mission statement is twofold. It's to provide continuity of supply to our members at the lowest sustainable cost. That magical sustainable word again, and it's also to support the initiatives of the brands that we support. We do not specify product, the brands specify the product, and we execute against their objectives. So whether it's culinary teams, define product attributes, people within the brands have a consumer social responsibility platform that are part of the brand strategies that find their way into product design. We input into that, but ultimately we are really there to execute. We spend about $2 billion a year, source probably 1,500 items from 350 suppliers, move about 60 million boxes of product a year, so a lot of volume, a lot of throughput.
Thanks very much. I'm going to get us going with a few questions here, but I just want to let the audience know we are going to be taking questions from the audience. I know that I'm sure that the folks on this stage are customers of many of the folks in this room, so I'm sure you have some concerns that you'd like to share with the group, so we will be encouraging that give and take before too long, so please be ready with your questions. In the meantime, I'll ask each of you, what are some of the biggest issues in animal agriculture that you and your company are working with or hearing about from your customers? Whoever wants to
I'll start. I'll say first and foremost, basically our brands are there to deliver a quality, food-safe product, right, that delivers the right value to the consumer. So frankly, the issues we're dealing with around animal ag performance is purely a performance issue relative to quality, which is like woody chicken breast. I mean, that's something that gets immediate attention from our restaurants, from our operators, and we put a whole lot of resources into fixing that. That gets tied to animal welfare issues. But so beyond that, the brands are interested in, first and foremost, without a doubt, food safety, right? That is number one. It crosses, of course, all food groups. Beyond that, traceability, transparency, words we've heard before are becoming more and more important to the brands. And as we move beyond that, specific to animal ag, we are pretty deep into broiler welfare. Certainly we've made some commitments, or the brands have made commitments relative to cage-free, to gestation crates. So those are the predominant animal welfare type issues that the brands have been engaged with.
So I'll add to that. So it goes beyond not just meat-based protein or animal-based proteins, but into this whole idea of carbon footprint. And the carbon footprint of our food is very important to many of our clients across the different sectors. And so you'll hear things about that and how we incorporate that into how we service our clients. And then you'll also hear things about better meat. So to coin a phrase to take a phrase from our healthcare sector, less meat, better meat. So they're talking about plant-forward diets, but they're also talking about certifications with meat. And what that definition of better meat is going to be different between sectors. So in healthcare, they're going to be mostly concerned about antibiotic use. And they also want to see what's happening locally because they want to connect to their communities. Healthcare is very much about community health, so they're trying to understand how to connect to communities, and that means local product, that means storytelling about the community that they're based in. In universities, you're going to have a different sense of that, and many of the universities may specify specific certifications that they want. And what was very interesting that I heard this morning is having a multi-attribute certification available that we can start thinking about talking to these groups that we work with, because right now there's so much chasing of single attribute items that it can be really challenging on the supply chain to make sure that we're sourcing the volume that we need to feed that many people every day. So our first concern is how do we feed all those people, right? We have to serve safe, nutritious meals that are going to be accessible to everyone that we're serving. So those are some of the main things that are coming out in the how did you say it? Concerns that we hear from consumers around animal ag.
So, yes, and we deal with 1,215 stores in 7 states in the Southeast, and we deal with everything from slow-growth chicken, DE, GM, et cetera, proliferation of label certifications. We talked about that earlier today. And we are the forward face to the customer. We talked about that in the consumer panel this morning, where how the trust they put is really on who they're buying the product from, not necessarily from who's producing the product. So a lot of our challenge, if you will, or one of our big concerns is to trade these out.
Try that one.
This one works? Is it just me?
No, that's good.
All right, good. Okay. So one of the challenges we have is making sure we've made that right selection, make sure we're partnering with the right suppliers that are going to share our values as a company, that are going to treat animals the right way, that are going to do what needs to be done to maintain that trust that the customer has built with us. And that's what we're looking for, is how do we maintain that trust with them, and how do we speak to those items I might have mentioned earlier between BE and some of those other things. How do we maintain that communication with them so that they maintain that trust with us?
There's a great point that you made, that when it comes in terms of the retail grocery store, the supermarket, the food service operator, you're the face of all these issues. So you need to be well versed on what's going on and what all their top concerns are. So that is a natural lead into my next question. You're all dealing with a host of issues that we've talked about since this morning: animal welfare, antibiotic use, sustainability. What are some of the sources that you all go to for information on these issues?
Well, for me, it's constant sensing of the environment, whether it's reading articles, whether it's working with partners and stakeholders. Coming to events like this is very important. Talking to producers, talking to the NGOs, understanding what's really going on and collaborating to come up with the best solutions going forward. We have student groups that are constantly at different universities. I don't want to say complaining, but not happy with certain aspects of what we do. Well, we could take, the defensive position, or we could collaborate with them. And we find that in collaborating with them, we come up with improvements and also educate them and make them our allies in a way that they really understand the complexities of what we're trying to do, and then try to help us come up with ways to be better. And many of those folks end up in our company and really being advocates in a way to make a positive difference. So when it comes to sources of information, I think every voice is important.
Yeah, I think it's all of the people that are in this room, essentially, as a consumer-facing brand or brands that we support. Obviously, the brands are going to listen first and foremost to the customers. The 6 people that were up here this morning are our brand's customers, so they are the ones they will listen to first and foremost. Obviously, that creates some challenges, right? Beyond that, they will make themselves available to NGOs. We will certainly participate in the discussion, and we're bringing in our suppliers, the trade groups, any of the stakeholders that can help us to understand what the consumer wants, what the facts are, what the realities are, what the capabilities are. So it's a broad and varied group, and of course, certain NGOs may not always be invited to the party, but they are part of the party, and we engage with them.
So we do a fair bit of social listening as far as what the consumers are talking about, what people are interested in, a fair bit of market-driven data, research to see what are consumers buying, which, we talk about some of the cage-free eggs and some of those issues where there are deadlines that are set out there, but maybe that's not in line necessarily with what the public is actually buying. Shocker, what they say is not always what they really want. So we look towards those things, but we also look towards industry associations, and we look towards our partners in the supply chain to help educate us on some of the issues that are out there, and help us design what our communication strategies are back with our customers, and try to make sure that's a common message, that we're all in the same boat, so to speak.
How are you involving your suppliers in your sourcing policy decisions?
Our procurement teams do work very closely with them. We'll bring 3 or 4 groups in at a time, trying to talk through what our expectations are, what standards we would expect to be followed, be they food safety, animal well-being, just general practices, etc. So we outline all of that. And then we work with them to meet those needs.
So we have an animal welfare charter that we ask all of our contracted suppliers to sign. That's a global document that goes across all of our sourcing operations. My role is kind of interesting. I'm a sourcing professional and a sustainability professional, and I'm embedded in supply. So my role is not necessarily to source the products, but make sure that our sourcing managers, depending on what commodity they're covering, have the information that they need about what's coming, what's going on now, so that they can really work with our supply base on what are some of the issues today and coming tomorrow, so that it's embedded into our sourcing process in the way we put together our sourcing strategies and supplier management. So we engage our suppliers kind of constantly through that kind of interaction. I'm actually going to visit a farm next week with one of our suppliers. So I get involved sometimes, but in the end, I want to make every single one of my sourcing managers a subject matter expert in utilizing this corporate responsibility lens in how they work with their suppliers.
And for us, our customer, the brands are the ones that will have certain sourcing or supply policies, whether it's, again, CSR or what have you. So whatever those policies are, certainly we will help to execute them as they are looking at evolving those policies. We have a seat at the table and certainly are providing information on feasibility, cost, timing, et cetera. So it definitely is a process that is pretty collaborative between the sourcing group as well as the brands.
There are a number of different voices, obviously, trying to be heard as part of this discussion. You have customers, you have consumers, advocacy groups. Who are you hearing from the most when it comes to animal ag issues?
University students.
David?
Yeah, students, younger generation, people wanting to connect with their food at somewhat of a mission or an emotional level versus more of, I just need to eat something. So there tends to be more of that approach to, who you do business with, wanting to connect more with those values versus, I guess, just what your needs happen to be, so to speak.
I think our brands are probably hearing most from the NGOs, basically.
Yeah, I would add to that. It might be a tie there. That's one of my roles as well, is I'm the contact for the animal welfare groups for my company.
Okay. Whether it's grocery retailers, food service wholesalers, food service distributors, a number of different very large, prominent, and influential companies have set very sweeping milestones for themselves in order to convert their supply chains based on animal welfare issues, whether it's sustainable seafood, meat procurement, cage-free eggs, and the deadlines have ranged anywhere from, some of the first ones I remember hearing were 2020. Well, that's less than a year away, to 2025. That's not much farther down the road. Do you feel, tell me a little bit about, one, the deadlines that your respective companies have set for yourself. Are you staying on the particular timetable? And are these goals still realistic considering the current status of the supply chain for making sure that you have a steady supply of product as defined by these guidelines?
So I think dates are important. I think goals are important. I think tracking them, being transparent about what the challenges are important. Because if you don't talk to your stakeholders about the challenges, or you blow a metric out of the water, the trust is lost. Right? And so I think it's better to have these conversations about what the challenges are when you make these goals and maybe have some challenges on getting to them, or need to get some real systemic work done to get there. So in some cases, maybe you just need to work with longer-term contracts with your suppliers to get to the goal, just so that you're building up what they need to do for capital improvements to change practices. But sometimes it's something systemic like seafood. Like so many of the challenges in the seafood space is a complete change on a global basis and an influence that no one company can have. So how do you then get involved with coalitions of people throughout the value chain, including NGOs, and truly get on that path forward? And I think the more work we do with understanding what is this goal about, what might be the barriers to getting to those metrics, and then putting the right kind of mitigation tactics in place is important. But overall, I think transparency has to be there, because if you can report on your challenges, maybe there's someone out there who has the solution that maybe you didn't engage with before. And if you just kind of hide it or cover up or fudge your metrics, you're not going to make the positive change that you supposedly went out to actually accomplish.
So we have put our guidelines out on our websites, which according to our customers, nobody looks at anyway. So trying to put those out there so that people understand what we're doing as a company and how we're trying to meet those goals, that's important to us. One of the things that we deal with is that, the customer is not one monolithic block, right? They all have different wants, different needs. They compete with each other all the time. So when we look at things like cage-free eggs, for example, we can put a goal out there, but if the data is telling us that, okay, 10% of your market is actually buying cage-free eggs, that makes it difficult then for us to say, okay, well, we're going to go completely all out there in the next 2 years. It doesn't really work that way. So trying to figure out how we work back with our supply chain partners to make that possible, to set those to meet those guidelines that not only we've put out there that we're measuring, but that other companies have put out there and are measuring too. So how do we get there as part of the challenge? Is everybody going to meet their 2020 goals? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. So David in the retail space can pretty effectively service your customers' needs, understanding that they're very variable, they are different. In the world of restaurant, it's a little bit more challenging, right? We have these little $1 million manufacturing shops that take a whole bunch of ingredients and customize them into products. So it's difficult we found so far, it's difficult for a restaurant to offer a conventional egg or a cage-free egg or an organic egg. You can imagine what that will do to the operation, right? So I think a lot of restaurant brands and people are coming in, the consumers coming in for the brand. So the brand needs to make a statement. And I think it's difficult for a restaurant brand to say, oh yeah, 15% of the consumers are buying cage-free and we replicate that. That doesn't play too well. So a consequence of that is brands have stood up and made statements. And the brands that we support have cage-free commitments. They will be cage-free by 2025. And now as a supply chain, it's our job to work to execute that. So we need the suppliers, the marketplace to support that. And I think that creates some angst, of course. We're dealing with the angst, but it creates opportunity as well. As a buyer, if I had my druthers, product that's commoditized makes my life easier. This is about a differentiated product, and a lot of you have helped create this differentiation. Now we've got more differentiation that we are demanding, and we got to, again, we'll figure out how to execute it, and the supplier community, all of you will help us to figure out how to do that.
Great. I think we're ready to take some questions from the audience.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. My name is John Johnson with the National Pork Board. A subject was mentioned this morning briefly that I'd love to hear the panel explore, and that's the subject of gene editing. And when I say gene editing, I'm distinguishing that from genetically modified, in that it's a science that allows us to work to manipulate the existing native DNA in an organism, not introducing foreign DNA into it. So it's achieving the same thing that natural, conventional breeding can achieve, only in an accelerated time frame. And it's a really exciting science that has great promise for both human medicine as well as plant science, as well as livestock. My question for you is, as we see this technology coming forward at a pretty rapid pace, it's got great potential to allow us to produce more food using fewer natural resources, and to have healthier animals and use fewer antibiotics, a variety of benefits. But the question is, given the experience with GMOs in the past, what is it that you and your organizations feel is necessary to achieve acceptance of this technology in the supply chain out to the consumer?
I'd say let's engage the influencers. I said because the social media is going to create emotional reactions to things without the science behind it. And honestly, people don't trust science anymore. This is a trend that's quite frightening, but it's out there, right? And so how do we can't beat them, join them, right? How do we become better at communicating things that have positive benefits and finding people out there in the public who can help us be brand ambassadors for those type of changes, those type of innovations, so that emotional reaction happens to benefit good solutions that might be innovative and might scare people a little. If we leave it to everyone else in social media to react, right? So I think we have to, but from my perspective, you also have to have the science behind it. So for me personally, that would be important, but general consumers, you heard this morning, a lot of the information they get is word of mouth or social media. They didn't do internet research even. So I think that is the wave of the future. It's a new way of communicating and a new way of making sure that you can influence people's decisions.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a good answer to that, other than I can say in the absence of the food industry putting out a proactive message, talking about these sorts of things, consumers aren't going to know. And they're not going to be comfortable with it. They're not going to trust it. I think we've got lots of examples over time of new technologies that have come up that have done great things for, say, food safety, irradiation of beef, those sorts of things, that never gained consumer acceptance. And if it doesn't gain consumer acceptance, it's not going to go anywhere. And we'd like to see positive things come out of our industry that talk about here's how these things are going to improve life, and how do we build back that trust in science and some of those sort of things which we face on a day-to-day basis.
And our brands will certainly respond first and foremost, again, to their customers. If we bring a technology, an idea that serves a purpose, again, supporting our mission, it's something that would be evaluated, and anything like gene editing, my opinion, is going to be something that would be done very, very carefully, just because of probably the risk to the consumer. So something like that, there'd have to be a real strong call to action and a lot of validation before I think the brands that we support would move forward in that fashion.
Another audience question.
Hi. I have a question about when we have deadlines for things like cage-free, and you talked a lot about setting deadlines and informing your stakeholders, your customers. But I'm wondering about the other side of things, like the farmers and the ranchers, and are those people part of the discussion about, is this possible, is it viable, is it sustainable? Because I think that is a big concern about when they have these issues like deadlines like 2020 or 2025 for cage-free eggs, and we're already seeing some of the problems with that. So can you address, like, how do you bring your farmers and ranchers into that discussion, that communication, before you set deadlines?
So I would say, first of all, certain product areas or categories are more complicated than others, right? We have, or the brands have commitments on cage-free, certainly a more vertically integrated protein, basically. So we have more direct communication with the growers and have a better sense of what that's going to take and how doable it is. Certainly as we get into pork and then beef, those are more complicated because of the supply chain, and I think some of the commitments that have been made or have not been made probably are reflective of that, but certainly we don't in a vacuum make commitments without some sense of their being able to be executed.
So I'll agree with that, and we work with our supply base whenever we're considering a commitment, and sometimes the answer is we don't have a solution today, but the pressures that we're getting from the market make it important for us to take the commitment anyway, and then we have to work closely with our suppliers to say, okay, what do we do now, right? How do we solve this problem? And sometimes it's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, we don't set deadlines to miss them. I mean, we recognize that there are challenges in meeting them. but at the same time, if we don't start moving towards where the markets are taking us, we'll never get there. I can certainly feel the frustration in that question as far as, okay, you guys set a deadline, great, now how am I going to meet it, But we do bring in our suppliers and we talk with them and try to figure out how we approach this problem and how do we bring solutions to it. So, but again, is every company going to meet their 2020 deadline? I don't know. We'll see.
We had a question down front, and then on this side next.
Okay. In a similar vein, what is your opinion on slower-growing broilers? Have any of you made any type of commitment, possibly with a group like Global Animal Partnership or anything along those lines?
So I can say I'm part of the class of 2024, as the NGOs call us. We have made the commitments that were asked for by a coalition of a number of the animal welfare groups that we engage with around the broiler chickens. I've been to a number of collaborative groups on how the heck do we get there, and that is, the conversation has been very frank and open and has involved the entire value chain, right? So from the breeders and the genetic organizations that are looking at this, with the researchers who are doing research that isn't done yet, right, on what is better welfare outcome chicken, and how do we define that, and everyone in between, including the different NGO partners, and we don't have solutions yet, but we continue to have those conversations and work on that. Unfortunately, I believe that so many of the organizations in our supply chain are waiting for some of that research to be done, and it seems to be coming later and later. So it's challenging when you kind of put the cart before the horse in making the commitment, but the research isn't really done on what the commitment really means. And so our supply chain doesn't want to start down a certain path that doesn't even meet the commitment in the end. So we're kind of in this weird waiting game where there's a lot of work being done on what's better welfare for chickens, but the breed part of it is still kind of this question mark in many people's minds. And it could be challenging saying that this is 2019 and our commitment is 2024, to imagine that there's going to be 10% of the chicken that is bought going to meet this commitment, right? Because that's how many people have committed to that.
And I can say that we're looking at it, and I couldn't point you to a specific mission statement or value statement at this point in time, but we're aware of it, and we have groups that are trying to figure out what do we do with it. If this is what customers are going to start asking us for, how do we get it into our stores? How do we, what's the labeling that's supposed to be on it? What's our exposure for those pieces of it? And I don't think we really have answers for that at this point.
And the same with our brands. Neither of them have made any specific commitments, but that's certainly a topic of ongoing discussion, communication, and they're trying to navigate their way through what does that look like, what should it look like.
We're going to go here first and then there.
Thank you very much for your time today. I was wondering, we all want our food to be safe, and so we're talking about the slow-growing chickens, and we also then talked about our carbon footprint. So tell me to equate, if you're going to have slower-growing chickens, what's the carbon footprint going to be?
So that's a great question. So it used to be that you'd have these animal groups and the environmental groups kind of butting heads. And now they've begun to realize that if they come together and say less meat, then they make that equation possible, right? So if something's going to have a bigger carbon footprint and cost more, right, how are you going to do that, right, and balance this idea of what's being termed better or having certain certifications. So it's interesting that they're starting to go hand in hand, and people are starting to do that. Certainly there's a trend in, I'm not going to say vegan or vegetarian eating, because a lot of people who call themselves vegan and vegetarians aren't. They say except for Tuesdays or when I'm not with my girlfriend, or, so, you have this trend certainly to eat less animal-based proteins. That is happening definitely in the younger crowd. So I think that's how people in their heads are balancing that double ask.
I think the short answer is I don't know. I mean, quite honestly, we talk about competing ideologies or competing asks, right? So I want this, and they may be in two different directions. So I don't really know what the answer to that question is, but I know that we do rely on folks to look at it and see, okay, how do we figure this out? What is the carbon footprint for a slow growth chicken versus one that grows in 60 days? Are there alternative meat protein sources that people are looking at for the same reasons, right? So I don't know what the answer is, but I know from an animal agriculture perspective, we probably should put some resources to figuring that out so that we can communicate that back with our suppliers.
Very fair question. Absolutely. We had 6 consumers up here today, and I know a lot of the questions were leading. I didn't hear any of them mention carbon footprint or what have you. So again, I think there is a lot of facts and science, and at times I think we can be perceived as being defensive. But the fact of the matter is, our customers, your customers, they're not poorly educated, they're not misinformed, they're informed, but what are they being informed with? And I mean, that's what we all get to deal with, essentially, and it's our job to deal with that, basically.
Now on this side.
Thank you. Beyond the timeline commitments to some of the issues that you've discussed, what do each of you see as your greatest threat to your supply chain?
Which supply chain?
Supply chain.
Oh, African swine flu.
Yeah. Yeah, our challenges, tactical or strategic, are certainly African swine fever, without a doubt. That's getting a whole lot of attention right now. Political activities, trade tariff creates challenges. Gosh, an environment where the motor carrier industry and distribution industry has run it at capacity, essentially, and the pendulum has swung. It's a seller's market, and the things we used to take for granted, which was very quick responses, lead time, continuity of supply, was something that was easy. That's becoming more challenging based on the sector that we're in. But that freight distribution, labor really is a challenge that creates threat to us as well.
Yeah, I think you could bucket under continuity of supply. And that can be specific to one type of animal protein or a particular thing our customers are looking for that maybe we can't provide enough of, like cage-free eggs or slow-growing chicken.
David, any thoughts?
I'll pass it on.
Okay. I think we might have time for one more question from the audience. No, we're going to wrap up now? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
We're done.
No, one last question to the panelists before we head out. What would be the one piece of advice that you would have for our audience members on how they can more effectively engage with your companies?
I want more stories. Right? I want more stories that I can use point of sale. I want some enough transparency and information about where the food comes from that I can utilize with my customers. Because when you can connect people to where their food comes from, I think that can help them understand a lot more instead of just going after kind of issue-specific things that they might want. We heard that this morning. If they trust the brand, but they also, when they hear stories or see stories or understand the farm that it's coming from, that can be very, very powerful, and that can be local producers, or it can be large farms with people at the end of it. Right? People connecting with people, I think, is really important, and from my perspective, that can help us deal with some of these maybe controversial challenges that we have if we can really connect people to their food and the people who are producing it.
I think that's a great point. A comment I made earlier, as far as we've got the face of the brand, we're the face of the customer, but ultimately the care of the animals that's in your hands. So if you can help us with that story and help how we communicate that and craft that and share that with our customers as well as yours, that helps us kind of set the tone for where the conversation goes, rather than letting other groups set the tone and conversation for us.
Mark, you get the last word.
Yeah, I will say two things. I'll echo what was said. I think we got to be able to tell our story, and more importantly, we've got to be able to tell our story in a credible fashion. I think that's one of the challenges that we, right or wrong, suffer from. Big business does not have a whole lot of credibility or trust, and earlier today I listened to Debbie talking, and I hear something from Kraft, and I think that those just right now in our world bring different levels of credibility. So it's not only telling your story, but we come from a place where arguably we're disadvantaged, and we got to figure out how to tell it credibly, right? And I think that you all are making strides there. The other thing I would add very quickly is the idea of again, a credible certification, right? Some sense of rules or what have you, and that were talked about earlier. I like the idea that the struggle is, it seems that there are no shortages of labeling or claims or what have you. So how can we come up with a certification that, again, is credible, that will help guide us and be able to deliver?
Mark, Judy, David, thank you very much. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists.